in the group reading, this quarter here. And as I was reading the Gospels recently, not particularly for our reading for this quarter, I was struck by a particular idea that actually occurs in Matthew. It's one of those statements that would just seem to be kind of thrown away and read over most of the time. But at one point in Matthew chapter 14, verse 13, it says, after the death of John the Baptist, that Jesus withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. And I started to see a pattern as I was keeping on reading, that the Gospels mention multiple times that Jesus would withdraw by himself to pray. He would either leave the disciples or leave the crowds. And I reflected on the fact that there's a lot that I can learn from statements like these. Because I don't know about you, but I really struggle with making prayer a regular thing. It seems like there's waves up and down, or if I do it really well, and then it's a desert. And then I get back into it. And I'm talking about prayer just outside of the dinner table, or Wednesday and Sunday, and things like that. Real good, healthy prayer. And if that's true for me, it's probably true for others too. This is maybe something to look out for if you struggle with prayer as we go through the Gospels. But essentially what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some examples, some principles of Jesus' own prayer life and draw applications from those. And so we've spent a lot of good time this last quarter looking at how the psalmist prayed, and that was really beneficial to me personally. I don't know about you. But I need more help. And so I'm looking at these things usually. And today I want to look at what some of the Gospels say about Jesus' prayer and his personal habits in terms of really his spiritual practices is what it is. And then what examples we can take from that. So this isn't probably going to be any groundbreaking information for you. But maybe it'll be a little bit of a change of pace from what could have been pretty heavy this morning. You know, self-denial is not a light topic. But these are things that we can utilize and apply for our growth. And these snippets, I think, are really powerful, but they're also eminently practical. And it's something that we should look for as we read the Gospels this quarter. And so we're going to look at Jesus' specific habits in prayer and in spiritual practice, and we're going to draw four principles tonight. And I say that, and I need to count my points. It is 4 points. So let's start in Luke chapter 5, looking at some of Jesus' specific habits. So Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16 says, but now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities, but he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. So that's kind of similar to what we just said a moment ago, that Jesus would make sure to go where no one else was and pray. If we also look at Matthew chapter 14, 22 and 23, it says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, that's the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And then after that is when Jesus walks on water. But we see from both of these, and this is what we're doing, we're taking the information and we're looking at it and saying, what is it telling us? We see that in terms of Jesus' prayer habits, he prioritized time alone for prayer. One of Jesus' habits was to get somewhere by himself so that he could talk to God. Jesus needed time away from people, away from the craziness of life, to be in quiet reflection and connection. And of course, this is not just about rote, memorized prayer. This is, we can believe, a relationship that he was building. It can be hard sometimes to make this practice in modern life because we feel like there's always something that we have to be doing. I just don't have time for something like that because I got to do this thing with the kids, or I got to be at work at this time. And then when I'm done with work, I got all these things to do on the house or whatever it is. It is so easy for us to feel overwhelmed with all the things that we have to do and not make prayer a priority. But Jesus clearly made it a priority, even sacrificing sleep sometimes, if we want to look at the evidence. Getting up before the sun comes up when everyone else is still asleep. If we don't periodically take that time to withdraw, how are we going to recharge? How are we going to feed our souls? How are we going to maintain a connection with God and gain perspective on ourselves and on our lives? And an illustration of that is if you don't talk to someone that you're in a friendship or a relationship with, how would you possibly expect to maintain the health of that relationship if you never speak to them, if you never spend time with them? And so apparently Jesus needed this, and certainly that means I need it too. That this is something that I have to make a priority. That if we don't feed and recharge our souls, then we won't grow. So the question with that really is reflecting on my life and my habits and my day-to-day way that I go about things. Do I prioritize time to be alone and connect with my Father and feed my soul like Jesus did? And that's probably going to look different for different ones of us. Those who already wake up at 4:30 in the morning, I doubt are going to want to wake up at 4 in the morning and do this, and maybe lunchtime or maybe in the evening is better for you. It just depends on what our rhythms are like. But if it is a priority, then I will find the time. If this is something that's important enough to me, then I will do it because it's a necessity for my spiritual health. And that's the reality. And the next one that we look at, number 2 here, goes along with the fact that Jesus made it a priority. And sometimes our priorities don't line up with other people's priorities. And so, for instance, in Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 35, this is what I was alluding to earlier. And rising very early in the morning while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And so this was his habit, this was his rhythm that we can see throughout the Gospels. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said, "Oh yeah, let's go," right? No. He said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns that I may preach there also, for that is why I came." So Jesus had different expectations of what he was supposed to be doing than the apostles did. He withdrew to pray. They thought he should have been among the people. And they thought, well, you need to go entertain the crowds and, expand your popularity. And he said, nope, let's go to the next place. If we look at Luke chapter 5, this was one we looked at before, but looking at a different detail of this. But now even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. Now that's a really interesting contrast that's drawn there if you pay attention to it. Crowds are gathering to hear him speak and to be healed of their sicknesses, but he chooses to go somewhere else and to pray. And at first that sounds very odd. Why wouldn't Jesus want to stay with people who want to listen to him and want to be healed by him? It's because this was a priority. And so really, as we're looking at this, our second prayer habit of Jesus kept prayer a priority over other things. Jesus maintained this priority of personal prayer even when people thought he should be doing other things. And that's a lesson for us too. Jesus made this part of what he did, and even when others thought he should be doing other things, he was devoted to speaking to the Father. He understood the centrality of this practice and that this was necessary for what he needed to do. And really, in a lot of ways, I think that if Jesus didn't maintain this sort of relationship with the Father, there might have been detriments to his ministry. And I think that's one of the reasons that he did this and was so adamant about it. And from that Mark 1 passage above, it seems like prayer helped keep Jesus' perspective on what was important. He spends time with the Father and realizes, no, I need to do this, not this. This is why I came. I don't know if that's totally a coincidence that he said that at that point. That was something that he felt like he needed to do no matter what other people thought. And in Luke, it's clear that even though people were coming to him and asking for help, he kept his life of prayer. And again, that's sort of an odd thought when we think about it, that Jesus would, the word neglect comes to mind, but I don't mean that necessarily in a negative sense, neglect to entertain those people. But sometimes other things just are not as pressing. There's sometimes things that are more important. And I've noticed as a father that I need to take care of myself, both physically and spiritually, to be able to do what my family needs me to do. And if I neglect that, it is a lot harder, or I'm not able to be what they need me to be. And so a lot of times it feels selfish to spend that time in the morning, or to take half hour to exercise or whatever it is. We're not talking about that right now. But sometimes it feels selfish to take that time. It took me a little bit to realize I'm doing this because this is what I need to do what I need to do, to be the father and to be the husband that I need to be. And that's been a perspective shift for me. So don't even just think about it in terms of what you initially gained from it selfishly, but think about what it does for you in your capacity in serving God in whatever context you're in that's for the benefit of others. So do you maintain your priority of connecting with God? Or do you let other things routinely get in the way of that? And sometimes, of course, if there's a big emergency, you're probably not going to stop to keep your normal prayer time, right? This is about balance and perspective. But do you see the connection between prayer and your spiritual health and what you need to do as laid out in Jesus' life? This was something that he needed to do, and so it's something that I probably need to do as well. And that is keeping prayer a priority. Now, if we look at the next thing, Jesus prayed before major life decisions, hardships, and thanks for things that had happened, etc. And in Luke chapter 3, in verse 21, it says, "Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, the heavens were opened." And so Jesus was praying at his baptism. That's an important event. In Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 35, "And they went to a place called Gethsemane." This is the Garden of Gethsemane, the night that Jesus is arrested. "And he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch.' And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed, that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him." So Jesus prayed at his baptism. Jesus prayed in the garden before he knew that he was about to be betrayed and arrested and crucified. And then we look at Luke chapter 6. "In these days, he went out to the mountain to pray." And so that is Luke establishing that this was a habit, a pattern for Jesus in his life. "And all night he continued in prayer to God. And when the day came, he called his disciples and chose from the 12, whom he named apostles." So Jesus prayed at his baptism. He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed before he picked the apostles. And that shows a pattern that Jesus is praying before big moments in his life. It's not just the day-to-day, but it's also the big things. And it wasn't just when bad things were happening either, right? He was praying in the garden like we would expect, but he's also praying at his baptism, which the Father reveals his divine glory there, so that's good. He also prays before the apostles are chosen, and that's good. And so we see that Jesus is praying before and during both good and bad events in his life. He talked with God when making big decisions, like choosing the apostles. He thanked God for what was being done through him and what he was giving him and the grand plan of redemption. And so that's a habit too. That he didn't just pray when things were good. He didn't just pray when things were bad. And it wasn't even just about the small day-to-day. But in general, what this reveals about prayer is that it expresses Jesus' dependence on the Father. And so we can say in looking at this, he prayed in good times, he prayed in bad times, and big moments. This was another pattern for Jesus. So do you find yourself, this is a question that popped up to me as I was studying this, do you find yourself making your prayer life essentially like a good luck charm? I kind of go over here and just rub this thing when I need it, and hopefully it gives me what I need. But other than that, I'm not really paying attention to it. Sometimes we can find ourselves just running to God when things get bad. Well, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus was there for the good, he was there for the bad, he was there for the in-between. And I thought about this in terms of exercise. So earlier I said we're not going to talk about exercise, and I forgot about this illustration. But in terms of exercise, if you don't have a certain level of strength, then big tasks are hard. And you have to work up to be able to do those things. And it makes me think of what some of you might have seen on social media or whatever, these things called dad injuries. And I saw one recently. It's a video of two men at a halftime show at an NBA game. And they're doing some kind of contest, and of course they're thinking, oh yeah, I can do this. And the guy goes up for the first layup, and he tears his ACL. And what happens with that is usually you'll see a middle-aged dad will be involved in some kind of athletic competition, and he'll assume that he can just approach this the same way that he did as a teenager. And because the body is just not used to that kind of load anymore, some kind of traumatic injury happens. And those are called dad injuries, where their mind is there, but their body is just not used to performing at that level because they haven't kept up that strength. And so that's kind of the same thing. If we just use God like a good luck charm or take him for granted and we don't build up that connection and that strength in prayer, then I'm not going to have what I need when I need it. If I don't have something to draw from, then in those moments, the good times, the bad times, or whatever, I'm probably not going to have the strength or the relationship that I would benefit more from if I had kept it up. And so Jesus prayed all the time. He didn't just run to God in the bad. It wasn't just when he was happy, but it was in between, and he had God help him, direct him in big moments. And so if we look at this next one, last point is more about how Jesus passed these habits on and how he discipled others. Excuse me. So in Luke chapter 11, and this is what Eric read for us, verses 1 through 2, it says, "Now Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, 'Lord, teach us to pray, as John taught his disciples.' And he said to them, 'When you pray, say,'" and that is what was read for us there in Luke chapter 11. But there were people there who were depending on Jesus for direction and for guidance. And so he taught them, among other things, to pray. He taught them how to pray. And he not only told them how, but he showed them how. And he demonstrated it by his example. And I don't think just in what he prayed about, but also I think in the times that he prayed, in the situations that he prayed. I'm sure that was an example as well. We have a lot of examples of Jesus in public either raising up a prayer in front of others or directing others to pray. And I think that this emphasizes That Jesus, in all of these different situations, for one thing, is keeping the spiritual nature of it so that people have perspective and direction for what they were going to do. And the other thing about this is that prayer does not always come naturally. How many of you, when you were able to first know how to do it, were just perfect at it? How many of us see our children know just instinctually how to pray? It's not something that necessarily comes innately, but it has to be taught and to be modeled, to be exemplified. And so parents should be teaching their children to pray, and older believers should be discipling younger believers in how to pray. And this is what we see in the life of Jesus. That Jesus prayed with others, and he taught others how to pray, and that was one of his habits. So as I think about that, for one, that's one thing I lack on, I know. Do I continue Jesus' example to my spouse, to my children, to my grandchildren, to my friends, as I model a life of prayer? As those who are dependent on me, do I walk them through and show them how to communicate with God? And do we demonstrate how important prayer is in the church? We see how central it was to Jesus' ministry and his life with the disciples, and does that reflect the same kind of importance and priority in the church? These are questions for our application here. But as we know, Jesus shows us the way that things ought to be. He's the example. He's the perfect one. And that goes for these spiritual practices too. And so we look at all of these things and we see what Jesus did and we realize, man, if he needed to do that, how much more do I need to do that? If this is the way that he approached it, then it's probably a good way to approach it. If this was that important to him, then it must have that same spot in my life as well. Jesus modeled a life that was devoted to prayer in bad times and in good times, in all situations. He prioritized feeding his soul and connecting with his Father really above all else. And I think one of the things, if I was to guess, is because would Jesus be able to do what he did if he was not in communion with the Father? We can look at what he did and what he taught about prayer and what he said about prayer, and we can use it to grow ourselves in his likeness. And I think these are extremely practical things that we see in his life, of what he did and how he went about it. We see, for one thing, the first one, that Jesus made time to step away and speak with God. We've all got to do that. That is numero uno, you could say. This was a priority that he kept even when people thought he should be doing other things. You know, why are you wasting your time with that? You should be focusing on this. There's all these people looking for you. Why are you out here by yourself? But he knew what he needed to do. And Jesus didn't just pray when he wanted something or when everything was bad. He prayed when things were good. He prayed about big decisions. He was thanking God for what was being done. And this was in addition to his regular habits. So it wasn't just the highs and lows. He maintained this constant trend of prayer throughout his life, and that's something that we see from him. But he also modeled this to others. He helped them grow. He walked them through how to do this. And we have multiple examples of this. He was teaching others and discipling them in how to connect with God. Because that's what prayer is. That's how important prayer is. It's speaking and connecting with God. As you think about this and we consider it, what do you see that you can use to change today? We're not talking about next week. We're not even talking about in the morning. What can you use to change today? What can you put into practice? So we see that Jesus unites the divine and the physical, and that's one of the reasons that he is the perfect example that he is. He is the perfect one who can bring us to God. And he also understands what it's like to be us. So he had all the same kinds of distractions and pulls and probably the hard mornings getting out of bed before the sun was up to do all of these things. But we still see the example that he gave us. A powerful, practical example. And the reason that he cared about prayer and teaching prayer was because it was about having a relationship with the Father. And that's ultimately what it was. And his death made that relationship possible. His death removes all the obstacles in our way of being able to communicate with God. And so he shows us how in his life, and he removes all of the problems so that we can have access to the Father. And we could go to the numerous New Testament passages that talk about this idea. But he has made that possible for you to have this privilege, for you to have this opportunity to build a relationship with God. And if that is something that you haven't started, then we're here to help you. As Jesus' people, we're here to guide and to teach what we can and to show you what he wants from you in any way that we can possibly help. You can talk to us after the service. You can text us during the week, whatever it is that you need. Just let us know and be thinking about that while we stand and sing this.